The day was February 15th, 2023. While one half of my touchscreen laptop displayed a Zoom call with an Asian Peruvian taking an English class with me, the other half of my screen was the Google Chrome browser with 4 or 5 tabs open with various sites I visit to keep me entertained and informed. If I didn't do this, my job would be duller than a butter knife. While scrolling through the teaching document on the left side of the screen, on the right side I entered a thread on a forum I frequent often titled, "The founder of Amnesty International ratted out Fred Hampton to the FBI." For those who don't know, Amnesty International is a global NGO that advocates for civil and human rights. It's an organization I once applied to work for during my time in Tunisia. Fred Hampton was a young man who was a rising leader of the radical Black Panther Party who was assassinated by the Chicago Police Department many decades ago. Needless to say, I was curious to find out who this person was. It always fascinates me how so many mainstream, palatable leftist figures like Gloria Steinem, the famous feminist, collaborated with the forces of state repression against the left. Turns out the guy who stitched on Hampton, the martyr, was a guy named Louis Kuttner. I never heard of him. He was a very active leftist lawyer in the US during the 20th century, who lobbied for the wrongfully incarcerated to be freed, and successfully freed over 1,000 improperly imprisoned people through appeal, might I add. He also created the legal innovation of the living will, advocated for international habeas corpus, and also helped the FBI kill J. Edgar Hoover's dreaded Black Messiah. Hero or villain? Can any color other than gray describe ambiguity? Oh, by the way, he helped free the fascist poet Ezra Pound from prison. This guy Louis Kuttner deserves his own meditation, but that's for another time. As I read through Kuttner's Wikipedia page, I came across the section titled The Gary Davis Case. Apparently, Kuttner counseled Gary when he was being prosecuted by the French government for issuing a travel document called the World Passport. As a Black American who has been living internationally for many years, sometimes refers to himself as a third world citizen or world citizen, and as a person whose political and ideological leanings tend to bend towards socialist globalism or transnationalism, my interest was piqued. I clicked Gary Davis's blue name and read his brief biographical article. In short, Gary Davis, whose real name was Sol Gareth Davis, was a radical internationalist who renounced his American citizenship when he was very young, becoming a stateless person, founded an organization that promoted a one-world government called the World Service Authority, crashed a UN meeting, and developed a new currency based on kilowatt hours of the sun. Wow, just wow. His life as well deserves its own meditation, but that's not the point of what I am writing here. What Gary Davis and Louis Kuttner had in common is that they both died in relative obscurity, their names mentioned by only a handful of intellectuals. What they also have in common is that they had ideas that would be considered radical, then and now, especially Gary's brand of broad internationalism. But why is that? Why is it that advocating for a global government unsettles so many people? Is it because many of us now feel so detached from, underserved by, and/or mistreated by our current regimes, democratic or otherwise? Is it because many of us fear that vesting power in the hands of a global elite representative class will leave us more powerless against the forces of globalization that we already feel left out by and alienated from? Is it because we believe that our national and cultural identities supersede the concern for other identities that will not share our heritage or values, or might even be current or past enemies to our respective nations? Is it that we fear the rise of a global tyrant like Hitler seizing the reins of power, either through force or wit, and then ushering in an age of death and destruction? Is it that we actually believe the current global order of land masses divided by clearly delineated nation states is the best and final form of organizing the only intelligent species on Earth that varies in color, religion, language, and beliefs? Do we fear the rise of a predicted Antichrist-type figure that is spoken of in some Abrahamic religions, who is prophesied to come and unify the world before he leads us to perdition away from God? There are a plethora of worries and arguments against a one-world government detractors would bring up, and I have only scratched the surface with the aforementioned. But I would ask anyone who would argue these points that said them this: does our current world system work the best? If our frame of reference is that imperfection of this scale is sufficient, then what is the point of trying to improve anything during our lifetime? We've all heard the adage that democracy, and by extension capitalism, is the worst system devised, except for all the others. Many people use that as an affirmation for their belief in the modern neoliberal order. But if we already start with the admission that our system is bad, it is a prerequisite that we try to improve and modify it, or outright replace it if we truly believe that progress for humanity is what we want. It's like saying eating shit is the worst thing you can do, except for eating nothing. How about we cook instead? I would argue that this skepticism to the unknown is ingrained in us over time by culture, society, and the pragmatism and apathy that grows in us as we become adults, feeling more powerless to change the forces around us and less idealistic. When we are younger and start to become aware of the world around us, we almost instantly notice paradoxes and contradictions that seem easily solvable, if not moderately reformable. Encountering the homeless, being poor, hearing of people starving in distant lands, learning about wars fought over territory, people dying of preventable illnesses. The tally of issues can go on forever, but the solutions to these problems also stretch ad infinitum as we increasingly progress technologically. World hunger, for example, could have been solved several times over had a better system to allocate resources globally been devised. By the same line of logic, many global problems could be solved by a globalist system. Not discounting the very fact that every innovation leads to new questions and crises, but issues as trivial as border disputes, which sometimes lead to lethal conflicts, could be nearly instantly fixed. Yet, we are convinced by ourselves and others that solutions that simple are naive, and by ignoring millennia of divisions ingrained in mankind by people past and present, is an error only an ignorant person would make. But I conjecture that this naivete is no less naive than believing a fragmented, multi-nation planet where hundreds of millions of people are prevented from living the best possible versions of their lives due to arbitrary, man-made borders makes sense. It doesn't make sense. The globalists and the nationalists are equally as naive. It's just that one group believes in something that exists in practice now that is flawed, while the other believes in an idea that challenges conventional wisdom. In science fiction, where stories are devised showing men conquering distant galaxies, cosmonauts offer greetings to the extraterrestrials on behalf of a global Earth Federation, or something of the sort. Not to my knowledge can I recall any work of sci-fi where the interplanetary explorers, centuries after my death, say, "Salutations, we come in peace from Moldova." You might say these pieces of fiction are just art, nothing more, but I argue that these works represent what many of us expect to be the inevitable of our species. There will come a time, whether peacefully or through force, where we will unify as a species. Ideally, the sane among us would not like to be under the grip of an earth-dominating Stalin, but the writing seems to be on the wall for someone or something to compel this finale. The point I'm making is that the idealism in art created by humanity's best often reflects our best intentions as much as it highlights our many flaws and darkest tendencies. Yet when we are confronted by the possibilities artists present us with, we are rarely challenged or impelled enough to question or confront our current condition due to us being trained by adult apathy and the convincing by ourselves and others that idealism is a form of ignorance. Many leftists tell themselves and others that they are idealists because they ardently believe that a new world is possible if a coalition of the willing could be formed and informed. But I will say most leftists, if they have never considered globalism, are truly not idealists, but rather pragmatists, because they never take the results of the analyses and critiques of modern inequality to its true extremity. Inequality in one's nation won't disappear if eradicated, if the forces of capital are allowed to reconstruct themselves across a border. I'm not here to lay down exactly how I think a new global order could be constructed, or how to organize it in a way that will ensure equity and equality for all. What I am doing is questioning the foundational beliefs that make globalism seem ludicrous and the nation state appear rational. Thank you.